January MTAC monthly conference. For starters, we want to welcome our speaker. It's a special treat. We have an expert like this with us with an unfortunate topic, but it's something that we need to be aware of. We have Lisa Mayhew here with us, who is a child death investigator with the North Carolina Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, and is also part of the North Carolina Child Fatality Prevention Team. She's dedicated her entire career to our little population with child development, and in this case, child fatalities. And she's been serving as the child death investigator and trainer for the Office of the Medical Examiner and the Child Fatality Prevention Team for the last several decades. So she's by far an expert at this topic, and we're really going to learn a few things from her today. And it's a time to ask questions because this is the person to ask questions with. She operates the Child Death Investigation Training Program over at the North Carolina Justice Academy, where law enforcement agencies from across our state and probably beyond our state come to learn how to do things right. So there's local, state, federal law enforcement agencies that are all learning from her, and today we're going to have opportunity to be able to learn a few things from her. Feel free at any point to type a question to the chat box, or if there's a pause, raise your hand and we'll try to recognize you, and we can always answer questions at the very end. Also, before we lose everybody to the actual talk itself, we want to remind everybody of our upcoming trauma symposium on May 12th and 13th in Charlotte at the Harris Conference Center, where we're going to be offering various trauma topics for everybody from pre-hospital through discharge and beyond, EMS, emergency medicine, inpatient, surgery, PT/OT, and everything in between. So please look forward to more information for that. And with that, Lisa, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Yeah, if you can help me kind of monitor the chat too, that would be great. Kind of gets a little hard to follow. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. And I love that I have so many people from the medical community on here. I don't often get to speak to this group, so this is great. Just an overview of numbers. Roughly, the medical examiner's office processes about 15,000 or so cases a year just through the ME system, and our kids run about 600. So it's a very, very teeny tiny small subset of the overall deaths. But in the entire state, we're going to have over 1,500 plus kids that die every year. So the medical examiner's office really only gets about a third of them. So when we say kids, we're talking about everything that is 17 years of age and under. And that is any death that is unexpected. So our jurisdiction applies to anything that just was not supposed to happen naturally, accidental, anything suspicious, suicide, homicide. When it comes to kids, everything is unexpected. So you're going to run across these in your emergency rooms where no one knows how the child died. Those would be our jurisdiction. And what we usually tell medical professionals is if you're not sure whether it's an ME case or not, go ahead and call your local facility, which for you guys mostly will be Mecklenburg, might possibly turn into Baptist depending on what county, or it may come to us. Yeah, if there's ever a question, go ahead and call to see if it fits under our jurisdiction. Some kids we do because they have medical histories, they have pre-existing conditions, but that pre-existing condition should not have led to their death. So sometimes they will fall under our jurisdiction, sometimes they won't, but it's always good to ask that. So this is an idea of what we've been dealing with for the past 2 or 3 years. This is just our data by the quarters. And as you can tell, starting in 2020, 21, and 22, we have skyrocketed. This is the same trend that we're seeing with the adult cases. So it's not kid specific, it's population specific. Our deaths overall in the medical examiner system are up about 30% over the past 2 to 3 years. So we are at max capacity across the board. I don't have any reasons for it. There don't seem to be any really specific trends. It's just overall increases. I can say that particularly with the 18s and overs, our homicides and our drug overdoses just went bananas over the past couple of years with the kids. Some of that's holding true for the homicides, but it's also a lot of babies, just a lot of babies. So we just don't really have any clear-cut answers for why we're seeing these increases. Okay, and I'll also say, just from a manners perspective, probably about 75 to 80% of what we deal with is accidentals or naturals. So the homicides and the suicides and the undetermineds take up the rest of that. So they're a much smaller percentage than the accidentals or naturals. So a lot of people think, oh, well, we just must be doing all the homicides. Most of what we see are natural deaths or accidental deaths.
Okay. So may I ask a clarifying question real quick?
Absolutely.
You mentioned a lot of what we may see will probably go to the the Mecklenburg medical examiner, or maybe Wake Forest. What's the difference between them and you, and what are the options for our other counties? Because we have some people from Gaston County, Cleveland County, Union County, and so on that are joining us today.
Perfect. Okay, so those are our regional autopsy facilities. So Wake Forest Baptist at Forsyth, they handle the western part of the state. And we handle 30 counties here around Raleigh. Actually, I think it's over 30 counties now. And then Mecklenburg they used to handle 6 counties, but they decided that they didn't want 6 counties anymore. So they sent 3 counties to us in Raleigh. So we now cover Union when we used to not handle Union. So Mecklenburg covers Mecklenburg, Cleveland, and Anson maybe. And then I think we picked up Union, Cabarrus. When we did pick up, I think we did pick up Anson. So they may do Cleveland, Gaston, and Meck, I think. So yeah. So they went from 6 counties to 3 counties. We picked up their other 3 counties. Yeah. So, because, we didn't have enough to do. So what's 3 more counties worth of death? They have 3 doctors. We have about 8 doctors in our office here in Raleigh, and Baptist has about 3, I think, all forensic pathologists. And then our other one on the East Coast is at Pittman Memorial, which I think is Vidant now. I'm not sure. But yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so with the child fatality system, here in our office, there's 2 processes. There's the investigation process and there's the review process. So I'll kind of explain what we do with both of those. We're going to talk a little bit about SUID with the babies, because babies are the predominant population that we see with our death cases. Babies are going to be everything but suicides. So they are the largest numbers of deaths that we handle. We'll go through the undetermineds and how we end up with undetermined rulings, because some people don't want to know why we reached that decision or why we leave cases there. And then we'll get to some systems issues. I want to make sure that we cover everything. Okay, so the investigation process, when a case gets called in, so for you guys, we may get case calls directly from the hospitals, from the emergency room. We may get the case being called in by the local medical examiner, or we may get cases called into us directly from law enforcement. So our initial contact with the case comes in through that case call, and it can come from a variety of different sources. We're going to request, our statute allows us to request any record that is attached to that decedent. So on the babies, we request every medical record possible. So we're looking at the ED record, we're looking at birth, we're looking at the newborn screenings, which that lab is actually in our building. So I have access to the newborn screen database, and I can get those. We get all the pediatrician records. We ask for CPS history on every case. And then we're getting any EMS and law enforcement reports on those cases. That's pretty standard for the babies. Some of the requests on the cases are going to depend on what the circumstances are and what that specific pathologist wants or needs for that case. So particularly if like it's a kid who's already got something pre-existing that we want to do a deeper dive into, then we may not necessarily get every record. We may focus on the pediatrician records and any workups that were going on because we kind of know what it may be. We just need confirmation that that's what it is. Suicides we cover from every possible angle. So I'm hoping that some of you on this training are actually already members of your local fatality teams. And then we have our state fatality team. The suicides get reviewed very, very heavily. So we try to address every possible path that we can on those. So if the child was receiving any therapies, any counseling, any medications, any inpatients, anything like that, we're trying to follow up on all of that. I like to follow up with schools to see if the child was struggling, if there's been drops in performance, anything like that. So we try to look at the suicides from every possible angle that we can. They are at record numbers. That's not a child specific thing. Suicides are up all ages, but it is, we used to stay under 30 and we're easily 50 a year, and we have been. I can make sure that Scott gets a copy of this if you need it. The accidents, those investigations are going to be by mechanism. If it's a drowning, if it's a car wreck. I think it's important for everybody to understand that not every death that comes to the medical examiner's office gets an autopsy. There's only a certain percentage, maybe about a third of them get autopsied. The rest are done by external exam. And so we don't autopsy all suicides. We do not autopsy all motor vehicle crashes. They're going to be, if it's a hit and run and there's the potential of charges on a driver, we will do an autopsy. Oh, great. Thank you, Scott. If it's a suicide and the mechanism of death is gunshot wound to the head or they are a hanging, they're likely going to be an external exam only. We also don't necessarily do full tox workups on those cases either. They will get, everyone gets a base tox, which is alcohol, and then tox is done kind of on a case-by-case basis, depending on circumstances. I will say that babies, all infants under a year of age in this state will get a full broad screen. And one of the things that we do look at is if one of these cases comes through your we need the admin blood, because once they're treated in your setting and they are provided medications, when they come to us a day or two later, we can't do tox analysis on them because there's already existing medications and drugs in the system. So we need to have the admin blood, and the local medical examiners are trained to make sure that they get that. And we also reinforce that with law enforcement to make sure that that's held, and the MEs can pick those up and submit them to the offices. But that's a big part of a lot of these cases. The homicides, which again kind of they fluctuate anywhere between 50 to 70 on any given year. Everything that we do on those is going to be by circumstance and what do we know, what do we need to know, and we work very closely with CPS, law enforcement, and the hospitals on any treatment records on those cases as well. Try to work through CPS on every case just to check for histories. Do respond to scenes. I'm in case consults across the state. I do scene reconstructions across the state. I also participate on MDTs. So any MDT meetings that are happening, I'm available for those. I do a lot for Wake County, just to kind of be the go-between, particularly when the cases aren't signed out yet. Sometimes I rope the pathologist into it, but they haven't had time to leave the autopsy suite in a couple of years. So once we get to the review is after the case has been signed out, after it's been completely done, and then we do the fatality reviews. And so anything that's needed for the review that we did not get during the investigation is also gathered. Sometimes the questions at the review are not necessarily pertinent to how the case was signed out. It just wasn't anything that we needed to look at for the death investigation piece, but the reviewer may want to look at it to see of any systems issues that can be addressed. So those are the two processes that go on with all cases. In North Carolina, we are pretty special, I'll say, because we review every single child fatality that comes into the medical examiner system, and that's not true for every state. Okay, so a lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the term SUID. It is the bane of my existence. I can't stand it. So this was a term created a number of years ago. There's a lot of discrepancy between forensic pathologists about what SIDS is and what SIDS is not. And so then SUID was developed to kind of defines age-wise for the anything 17 years of age and under, so birth through 17. SUID is basically a sudden unexpected infant death. That is the definition. So it applies at the beginning of a case, and for the record, every infant death is unexpected if it's coming to our office. So for us, this really doesn't mean anything. Clinically, the way that people try to look at it is, oh, well, was it this or was it that or was it that? Well, if it becomes a seizure case or that becomes evident during the investigation, then we would probably call it seizure natural. If it's a tox case, because tox comes back positive, then it becomes that. So you have all of these things, or as our doctors like to say, it's the trash can, and you're pulling out all of these other possibilities. Well, those other possibilities become other causes of death. So you start with a SUID, and then it becomes something different and more definitive and more precise through the investigative process, through the forensic process. So SUID is something that applies at the very, 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 very beginning. But at the very end, if we still don't know what caused that death, then it's undetermined. It is just a flat out undetermined. So that term, that SUID term, is not a cause of death. It does not go on death certificates. You may see it in the narratives on autopsy reports, but it is not the final cause or manner of death. But it does pop up. I see a lot of people using it in data presentations, which drives me nuts because they will frame it under the umbrella of unsafe sleep and SIDS, and it does not belong. Okay, it just simply does not belong. So sudden unexpected infant death is all babies on our end. It's all babies at the very, very beginning. So they become something else later. Okay, and then of course, if it's unexplained, it's just unexplained and it stays there. It used to be a coding issue, and to my knowledge, this has not changed. But if you put sudden and infant on a death certificate, it gets coded as SIDS. So if you put SUID on a death certificate and write it out, vital statistics computers are going to catch it as a SIDS and not a SUID because it doesn't really exist as a SUID. So there's all kinds of issues with it. We do not use that in the state of North Carolina. Our definitions are, if it is an infant under a year of age and it fits the definition of a SIDS, we will call it a SIDS, which by and large are less than 15 a year in this state. If we can determine that it was an asphyxiation, then we will call it accidental asphyxiation. But at the end of our investigation, if we cannot tell, then it is left as an undetermined. So that is that little term in a nutshell. And I have written these guidelines. I'm waiting to get approval from the office to put these up on our website. So hopefully this will be coming up soon. It's done. It just needs the stamp of the almighty approval. Okay, so undetermineds for me are always open. They can change. Anytime we have a medical examiner's case, Anything can be changed. Any cause, any manner. Autopsy reports can be amended. Death certificates can have a supplemental death certificate issued. Everything can change if we get new or different information than what we had at the beginning of the investigation and at the original autopsy. So any of them can change. We've changed naturals to homicides. We've changed accidentals to homicides. We've changed homicides to naturals. And so we can change them at any time, but undetermineds for me are always open. You can have a known cause, an undetermined manner, or vice versa, where you have an undetermined cause and vice versa, or undetermined completely. So usually what happens with these cases is we have too little information or too much information. And so we have to leave it as undetermined because we cannot put it in one of the other categories with 100% confidence. Okay, so a good example is a gunshot wound to the head. We know what the cause of death is, but we have information during the investigation that could suggest that it was potentially accident. And we have other information to suggest that it was potentially suicide. And because we can't definitively say it was one or the other, it is left in undetermineds. Right now, the majority of our undetermineds are infants, and it is because of unsafe sleep environments. Across the board, 75% of our undetermineds are going to be unsafe sleep environments on babies under a year of age. That's also true of our asphyxiation. Our accidental asphyxiations, 75% of them are overlays, are co-sleeping. So that is the bulk of what we do on a daily basis, are those types of cases. And then just some exceptions to rules. So one of the things that I try to get agencies to do and to think about, like investigating agencies, social workers, EMS, law enforcement, because when they're responding to something as a child death, policy and the emotionality takes over and policy and procedure goes out the window. So I try to get people to approach these cases from the aspect of it's a death first, it's a child second. So it's a death in your emergency room. It is a death out in the field. It is a death first, and you follow your protocols and your procedures for deaths. And then you may do additional or different things because it is a pediatric case, but that's not how the response is handled, because that makes everything just go out the window. So these little mistakes that happen because of the emotionality cause a ripple effect. And so little mistakes get inherited all along the way, which by the time that it gets to our office can be a big inherited mistake, and then we can't work around it. So I know a lot of you are with EMS. I'm sure if you've been to conferences before, I may have been banned from those conferences. I'm not sure yet. But one thing that we talk about is the resuscitation of deceased children at scenes, because it happens all over the state. I know lots of wonderful paramedics, and we have great paramedics that are now our local medical examiners. So now they're getting to see it from the flip side, because now they're the ME working on a case where it was done. But when a person is down at the scene and they're down clinically, the policy is simple. What is it? How does it read? When clear signs of death are present, ALS procedures are not to be initiated. So there's no age range on that, right? It doesn't say unless it's a kid. So it should be the same policy for every decedent, but when it's a baby or when it's a kid, unfortunately, they tend to be intubated and worked up for an hour or two beyond however many hours they were already down. So that can create pathological findings for our doctors that they have to work through. And for law enforcement, it means that they lose the scene because the kid is carted off of the scene or taken away. So there's lots of little steps there that cause us to lose information. On the hospital end, there's a couple of things. One is that these are just pet peeves of mine in particular, but SIDS is listed as a differential diagnosis in a lot of hospital systems. So we'll see that in the emergency records and in the ED reports. So for us, it's like that doesn't belong in the emergency room because there's no possible way of knowing how that child died at that point. I have a great graphic, one of our autopsy photos of one of our babies that died a number of years ago. And she's just, the picture is our ID photo, and she is just the epitome of everything you want to see. She's perfectly healthy. She's plump. She's well nourished. And so I put that picture up, and then I asked my groups, I asked my audience, you know, how do you think that she died? And there's an answer for every manner. She's a perfect example of what we see on a SIDS baby. She's a perfect example of what we see on an asphyxial death. She's also a perfect example of what we see on a drowning. She's a perfect example of a tox death. And she's also a perfect example of our head trauma deaths, which show nothing. So you can't look at a child or a baby on the table and know how they died. So for us, it's really weird that SIDS is a differential in the emergency room setting when it's going to be something that's diagnosed months later after a full investigation. Couple of other things about the hospital setting is the time that families are spent with decedents. So we do have an OCME hospital policy. I'll make sure Scott gets copies of this. It's pretty simple. It's all supervised. It's just supervision. So when it is a medical examiner's case, there needs to be supervision of the family with the decedent, particularly when it's unknown or suspicious circumstances. So that is detailed. We just want to make sure that the integrity of the case is maintained. And then also the bereavement boxes, the memory boxes that hospitals make. I love them. And I know that a lot, recommend in place of SIDS is differential. Undetermined or pending. There really isn't any way to call it other than that. You don't know. So I would just say pending or undetermined if that's an option, or unknown if that's also a differential possibility. But with the memory boxes, just be careful, because I don't want the pathologist to get to a point where they take that away, because it's very important for the families to get that. Just be certain when it's being done that if the hands or the feet are inked, that the ink is wiped off. But don't bathe the baby. We've run into that where they just bathe the whole kid. I like it where the hospitals that are using the paper that just works off of the oils on the hands, there's no ink involved. That really works. And that's something that the pathologists don't have any problem with. So that's a good way to go. There's a dual dispatch. So for those of you in EMS, and those of you, if you're possibly the medical director for EMS in your counties, that dual dispatch policy basically says if it's an unresponsive kid under the age of 18, then it's a dual dispatch, law enforcement and EMS together. So we need to make sure that that policy is happening in all the different counties. And then the general statute 902120, that is a statute that is what hospitals go by for what they call law enforcement about. So basically, you've got a person in your emergency room who is clearly dying from something that was done to them, a criminal act of intent, I think is the way that's worded. But there's a phrase in there that says, what does it say? Grave illness or injury. So we changed that statute 10 plus years ago. And it basically dictates that if you've got enough suspicion in your emergency room setting that you have to notify CPS, then the statute reads that's an automatic call to law enforcement as well. So we have to make sure law enforcement's getting involved when they are supposed to. No, we don't necessarily lose evidence. What we have had happen is that the babies aren't cleaned properly, and then the ink gets on the body in the body bag. And so then we get a baby on the autopsy table that's kind of covered in ink smears. So that tends to upset pathologists just a little bit. If there is any evidence on the hands to get, it's not likely on a kid. If it's a homicide, you're probably not doing that bereavement box anyway. So Yeah, I would say forensically, it's probably not nearly as critical on the babies and the kids as it is on the adult cases. But that's a if you're not sure, ask before you do it kind of thing on any of those cases. Yeah, and I would say with the family can go in if it's a known death, if it's a dog attack, if it's a car strike, if it's a witness drowning, you know how the child died, and then it's just general supervision with the family. But if it's an unknown or if it's a suspicious death, then our policy states the supervision then has to be law enforcement. And so they need to be in the room with the family at all times. And that's all written out in the policy. And then the MEs can come in and then the MEs can kind of take it from there. So we've had an issue lately with CPS showing up saying that they need to go in and view the children and do their, take pictures and examine the child. That's completely inappropriate, not necessarily. And there is no mandate and there is no policy that says that they get to do that. Our medical examiners have jurisdiction over that body. And so they are being told, no, CPS does not get to go in there and take any evidence, any photos or anything else. They will get that from from law enforcement or from us if they need it. Okay. And then what we are seeing currently, I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for other questions. Unsafe sleep continues to be the main thing that we deal with. So I think that this just affects everybody who may be dealing with families directly. Pediatricians, OBGYNs, anybody. So with unsafe sleep, it's not just co-sleeping, it's also where they're putting their babies to sleep. If you follow the AAP, they're taking off the market anything that kind of anything that curves or hugs the infant that slightly tilts the neck forward. So what we're finding is that if the baby's head tilts forward in any way, shape, or form, it can cut off the carotid and it can asphyxiate them. So the old recommendation of elevating the head, particularly like for babies with reflux, I've always have seen this. They'll take the recommendation to elevate the child, because that's what we want. You want to elevate the whole baby, not just elevate the head. And so what people do is they put a boppy pillow behind them. They put a pillow underneath them. They put them in a car seat. They do different things, and that pitches the neck forward, not just the whole body. And so you're seeing things being taken off the market, and you're seeing everybody back off of that. And the general recommendations are they lay flat, they lay flat, they lay flat. So boppy pillows, I have lost count of the number of deaths that we've had in babies in boppy pillows. So just across the board, they're all labeled. The tag says not for sleeping, and people put them in the little U-shaped pillow and put them into sleep. And sure enough, they either tilt the head forward or they roll over into the boppy and suffocate. But they won't be taken off the market because they're labeled. So that's a user error, not a product error. But the products on the market that kind of hug the babies or tilt them in any way or just push that little head forward, they're taking those off the market. We just had a 1-month-old last week that was in a swing that didn't have a prayer of getting its head in any way flat. So you're probably going to see those. The co-sleeping, we know that everybody does it. There's lots of ways to address it. You can address it with breastfeeding. There's lots of safe ways to breastfeed. But what we do get nursing deaths every year. So you've got a mom who's exhausted, who lays down to sleep and breastfeed with her baby and wakes up on top of it and asphyxiates it. Also with mothers in MDT treatments or MAT treatments, making sure that they understand that breastfeeding with drugs on board, sometimes things can go through the breast milk. So there's lots of things there. Plus they're usually breastfeeding in the bed with the baby after they've taken their medications. So just not co-sleeping as a general rule. I know you guys are in the Charlotte area, most of you. So the good thing is most of the hospitals in the Mecklenburg area participated in a program a number of years ago that taught unsafe sleep. And so they were accredited or got the, I forget what it was. It was through Healthy Start, when Healthy Start was still funded. There is the Cribs for Kids program, which does certify hospitals in the states as gold, silver, bronze for their work with unsafe sleep. I've had to call labor and delivery units at hospitals to find out how they taught parents, because I had to unfortunately inform them that the baby was taken home and co-slept with and died. So you're talking a 48-hour-old baby. So unsafe sleep is a really big issue. We've had safe sleep education in this state for 10 plus years, and the message has not been strong enough. Our numbers are not going down, and that is the majority of what we see with our babies. Tox trends, everything you can think of that's in people's homes. We are starting to see melatonin pop up on tox in our kids that we did not see years before. We have one particular toxicologist who has done a very deep dive into this. What we cannot do is interpret the melatonin. So it pops up, it's there in a certain amount, and we know it's there over where it should be because of what's endogenous versus exogenous melatonin. And some of these kids present with a fever. We don't know the interaction with that, but we do know that the numbers are pretty high for them to even pop up on our radar. So it's extremely unregulated. And I don't think people understand that within one bottle of melatonin off of the shelf with Zarbee's could be anywhere from 40% below what the dosage is supposed to be to 400% above what the dosage says on the label. So there's a lot, we just can't, we have not attributed any deaths to melatonin. We won't attribute deaths to melatonin until we can find a better interpretation of what it does. We do have concerns about the way that the melatonin interacts with the serotonin in the babies. That could increase the risk factor for sudden infant death syndrome. So we're looking at that as well. CBD, we do see that a lot at scenes. People are dosing up their babies to sleep with all kinds of various and sundry things. One of the things that happens with the babies and the toddlers is we get findings that are present, but they do not explain the death. So it's there and it should not be there. It's kind of like a rib fracture. It's a healing rib fracture that's not supposed to be there. So it throws the death into question. That's what happens in a lot of babies. They pop up positive for tox. It may be fentanyl. It may be heroin, cocaine, metabolites. It can be a variety of things that are there, but they're not there in a number that we can say that that's what killed the child. So it throws those cases over into the undetermined category because it's just something that's not supposed to be there. The toddlers, we're seeing more toddlers that find pills at a scene. They find the pill in the carpet. They find the pill in the couch cushion, and they put it where? Right in the mouth. So we call those incidental exposures. They're not necessarily neglect scenes. They're just someone dropped a pill and didn't even realize they dropped the pill. 30 years ago, we wouldn't have thought anything about this because it's happened to everybody. It happens to any of us are prone to it, but it would have been an aspirin or something like that 30 years ago. Now that pill in the couch cushion is an Opana or it's a Xanax. And so they're much more potent drugs that unfortunately are there for the kids to accidentally get a hold of. But they can also be in a drug house and just, cruise along the top of a table with their hands and then put their hands in their mouth, and then boom, we get a positive tox, but it's not enough to have killed them. It's just there and it's not supposed to be. So we see that a lot with cocaine and other things like that. The fentanyls pop up. Fentanyl's just bad across the board. I don't have to tell you all that. And then our suicides, again, we're just at record numbers with those, along with everything else on the adult cases. So yeah, and their mechanisms are guns, hangings primarily. I would say probably 48% a piece on those. And then we might have a drowning, we might have a motor vehicle suicide, or we might have a jump. Oh gosh. Yes, please correct parents when they call meds candy. It is not candy. It looks like candy though. Can we just get the pharmaceutical industry to stop making things that look like candy? um, oh gosh. It's kind of crazy. I'm not a fan of the amber necklaces. Whoever, please don't. We have a number of deaths where the amber necklaces are present. We can't say that they caused the death, but I'm not a fan of them. We got the Tessalon pearls. We've had some deaths from the Tessalon pearls, from the active medication in those, benzonatate in those. So we've seen toddlers who just pick up a fentanyl patch in the house because somebody threw it in the trash and they put it on their body like mommy or daddy does. And so it's not a neglectful situation. It's just that they threw it away and the toddler just went right behind them and put it on them. They mimic, they mimic everything that we do. And so there was enough left on the patch to kill the child, even though the parent or grandparent or whoever it was wasn't getting any more relief from the patch themselves. Yes, it's not candy. Oh my goodness. Yes. And just, whatever the circumstances, just if your baby's not in the bed with you, then I can promise you professionally and personally that you cannot lay over on it and kill it. That's about the only guarantee that I can give parents on safe sleep. But everybody get those deaths every single year, but they are 100% preventable. 100%. So that's about the only thing, that's the only guarantee that I can give anybody on any of these deaths are those. Any other questions, comments?
Lisa, what
Yes.
as part of your findings, what you're constantly seeing, you've alluded to some of this. What can we do differently as health providers, whether it be EMS, whether it be emergency medicine, trauma, what would help you do your job better on our end?
I think in the trauma setting, it's making sure that the right notifications get made, so that the investigations can get started quicker. I know you guys probably deal with a lot of transports, and that's where a lot of things break down, is when it's a transport. Like we deal with a lot with UNC. And so the kid comes to UNC, but they could have been flown to UNC from the coast. And so they're working hard at UNC to keep the kid going, but nobody thinks to call the people in Columbus County or New Hanover County or wherever. And so you guys are in a perfect position for that because of the medical facilities that you have around there. So when that kid, it doesn't originate in your county, it's making sure that the people who are responsible for handling that case get notified. And part of that is in the 90-21-20 statute. We had wanted some other pieces to be added to that, which didn't, but it doesn't do any good to notify Mecklenburg County of a kid who dies at CMC if the kid came from Cleveland County, or notifying Charlotte Mecklenburg Police if the kid came from Gaston County. So it's making sure that those notifications happen quickly and to the right people, and just good documentation, which we really don't have a problem with. I think one trend that I see is sometimes there's an overcalling of abuse in the hospital setting that then we can't confirm at the autopsy. And so then it's a matter, we get a bunch of doctors calling us saying, well, we saw this or we saw that. But then when we look at the physical brain, we're not seeing the same things. So I do encourage any physicians in the trauma realm or in the emergency room realm, that if you've got a question about a case or about an autopsy, do not hesitate to call the pathologist and follow up with them and find out, what they saw, how they saw it. And, sometimes scans get misread or x-rays get misread, that our doctors can't confirm that was actually on the body. So I think it's a good communication. It's a good education piece to follow up on, but the pathologists are always open to talking to the physicians. And a lot of times we do debriefings for them because they don't know what happened to the child. They don't know what came out of the autopsy. And so we'll follow up with the emergency room teams and let them know what preliminary findings were and things like that. So usually the RACs, or the regional facilities, are pretty good about that.
Great, thank you. Dr.
No,
Singh, you had a
somebody's
question?
got a hand. Somebody's got a hand up.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So a couple things. One, I think the autopsy thing is really important, and one suggestion I was to make, which is unfortunately logistically not always easy to do, if at all possible, if there's a question, actually being present for the autopsy, I think is helpful. One, for the medical examiner themselves, because you're able to give them some history, direct history, which I think has been helpful, and I think I've been in those situations several times where I've been able to describe what the issues were a little bit more detail than you get out of the documentation. So I think being present for those, I think, is very helpful. Approximately a long time ago, I was actually part of the Philadelphia Youth Fatality Review team.
Nice.
And one of the things that you were talking about, I think, is really kind of challenging because, unlike adults, information about minors is really very hard to get. And we obviously had input from schools, et cetera, and a lot of very confidential information with these meetings from social workers, school workers, everyone as you're doing these. But one of the things that we were beginning to investigate right before I came here to Charlotte was trying to look at specific patterns. Obviously, certain mechanisms of deaths are different in different parts of the town than others for a variety of probably many economic reasons. And one of the things about looking at that was trying to identify those patterns, because I think that gives you the opportunity of then, particularly geographic patterns, giving you the opportunity of then possibly looking at potential societal, regional, economic, or even political ramifications of what to do as far as resource management in those areas. Is there anything like that going on within the youth fatality reviews in our area?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like our system is like we're mandated system here in North Carolina. So all of the county fatality teams filter up their findings to the state system, which goes up to our state task force, and they push it through the legislature. So what everybody is seeing right now, and what we commonly get from the teams on feedback is safe sleep. That's the number one. So that's universal. It is the most indiscriminate death we have. But then, and the melatonin and CBD, it seems, is popping up. So I, with the kids, it's population, right? So your bigger counties have all of the same problems. But you do get these isolated areas where they've never seen a homicide before, or we've got counties that have never had a SIDS death. They've only had car wrecks. So it does tend to differ the more rural that you get, but I can say that the types of deaths that we see on the kids can be universal in every setting. You just may see more of them where you have higher populations, where you run into the same types of problems but it's so hard to say because, like I said, co-sleeping, unsafe sleep, universal, doesn't discriminate for any reason.
But are there any particular patterns or opportunities, particularly within something like adolescent suicide? So when you talk about some of the sleep-related issues, those are, primarily adult irresponsibility, I guess is the best word to use. But adolescent suicide, I find kind of disturbing in a lot of ways. But are there any particular trends right now? I guess you may want to throw in maybe a comment about influences of social media, et cetera. But and then obviously the COVID era really, I think, set us up for lots of problems with the lockdown issues. If you can comment on some of those areas, it'd be very interesting.
Well, our numbers went up in 2014. So we were seeing record numbers before COVID for our child suicide numbers. So we can't say definitively that had any other effect. We were already up at record numbers from 2014 on. There's efforts at every level with child suicides because our numbers are so high right now. So there's lots of efforts going out. There's lots of things being done from the state level down to the area, down to the local communities about things to do, suicide prevention. It is just one of those things that I think the mental health community likes to think that they have a great handle on it, but a lot of the information they have comes from kids who attempt. And when you try to compare kids who attempt to kids who commit, you lose the analogy. They're two different populations.
Yeah.
And what I tend to see is that we have.
I was just speaking with Dr. Weeks.
What I see is a complete lack of coping skills in these kids that I have not seen in like the first 10 years I did this. So I've been doing this since 2000. So I'm in my 23rd year, and we've done retrospective studies on our suicides. And the lack of coping skills is a huge red flag for me. And I've been seeing that appear more in the past decade than I did in the first decade. So what I'm talking about is the pressures, where we identify pressures. So those might be school pressures, those might be family pressures, those could be relationship pressures. And kids today live in a complete fishbowl. So everything they do is seen, everything they do is witnessed by everybody else because of social media. We have anxiety in kids that we didn't have or wasn't being identified 10, 12 years ago. But we also have a population of kids that have been exposed to a 24-hour news cycle in their lives. They've been exposed to every ounce of social media that is out there. And so it's changed. It's dramatically changed the way that they cope with things. And one particular thing that is getting some attention at the state level is when you take away a child's phone, or you take away their gaming system, or you take away their technology in any way, shape, or form as a punishment to ground them or whatever, we get suicides. So that is something that is being a little bit evaluated at the state level. So we see a few trends. It's just, I can't point to anything concrete on those. Did that help?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. It's yeah, it's crazy. Dawn Middleton, how hard is it for the medical facility to get a copy of the cause of death? Absolutely. All of our records are public record. So you can go onto our website, and on the left-hand side of the page of the North Carolina Office of Chief Medical Examiner, you'll see a document request tab. And you click on the document request tab, and it will walk you through the tabs to fill out to get any autopsy report. That will get you the tox report, the medical examiner's investigation report, and the autopsy report. So that's all public record here. Good questions. Marcus Barria, thanks for explaining unsafe sleep. Yes, Marcus, unsafe sleep is, yeah, it drives me crazy. It just drives me crazy all the time. Drives me. Thank you for that, Scott. But it is prevalent. It is prevalent. And I try to tell people, particularly investigators who are handling those cases, don't judge. Don't judge. Don't get mad about it, because it's everybody co-sleeps. But we can certainly prevent those deaths 100%. Yes, John Green has a question. I don't know if I can hear him. Are you talking?
Dr. Singh's partners. And
There we go.
can you hear me?
Now I can, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm one of the trauma surgeons here at Maine, one of Dr. Singh's partners, but don't hold that against me. But the discussions of suicide are just terrifying to me as a parent of teenagers. But
Ooh, yeah.
you said that these trends and the upticks were significant prior to the pandemic. Have we seen any differences in age groups, or have you seen any other demographic changes through the pandemic, or is all of this just sort of, things that have been on the rise, and is it because of all the other issues that you were talking about? Have you seen any sort of trends worth identifying?
Well, it used to be like, historically, our 15 to 17-year-olds have always been higher And then you kind of drop down to our 10 to 14-year-olds. And then every once in a while, we'd have one pop up in the 5 to 9 age group. What we've seen since 2014 is a steady increase in that 10 to 14 age range, which gets everyone's attention. Now, since the pandemic hit, I don't know if that gap has closed or if it has stayed steady, because when the numbers all go up and stay up, things kind of tend to even out a little bit. So we would have to go back and really look at that. To be honest, I have not had a chance to really do anything retrospective because I've been swamped with incoming cases. So, but it would be interesting. I mean, obviously the pandemic didn't help anything, but the numbers have stayed pretty steady up since 2014. So I don't know how we might be able to interpret the effect of that since the numbers were already high, but everyone is paying attention to the increase in the 10 to 14-year-olds. What I do not see is a change in demographics. I don't see a change in mechanism. It's just when you get into the investigations, I'm always looking for that little bit of pressure and where it comes from. The problem with child suicide investigations is the kids don't tell us the why. We get that on the adults. We do not get it on the kids. They might leave a note. They might communicate in some way, shape, or form that they were going to do it, but they don't leave behind why they are doing it. I just got a note in on a case, and I've got to look through it, but it's a lot of apologies. And that's a lot of what we see is I'm sorry and I've disappointed you, and you get a lot of that, but we don't get a lot of this is why I'm doing it. And that's a hard thing on these kid suicides is we've got enough to say that that's what it was. We just don't always get enough to say exactly why they did it. A lot of we see fights, arguments with boyfriends, girlfriends, relationship issues, failing a grade. One girl did it because of end of grade testing. So again, that's where I look for the little bit of pressure to give us an inkling of where we might go with it. Yeah, Star College. Yeah, that may be true in some cases, but I would say predominantly we're dealing with all levels, all incomes, all. I had a nurse overlay on her child. It doesn't. It's all homes. It is all homes. It's everywhere. It's just that some of them die and some of them don't. I get attacked because I say things about co-sleeping, and a family of 5 will just, completely go off on me because they co-slept with all of their children and none of their other kids died. And so how can you say that this baby died from co-sleeping? Well, it's just because the other 4 didn't. Doesn't negate the fact that the 5th one did. So it's some people have a real mental block about it, but it's all economic levels. It's all races, all homes, everybody co-sleeps. Yeah. Well, ironically enough, if you look at all of our scene photos in most of our co-sleeping deaths, there is a bassinet or crib right there that wasn't being used. A lot of times they're full of what I like to refer to as crap. There's clothing, there's laundry, there's trash, there's bedding, there's all these other things in there that take up all the space. So the baby's in the bed with them.
Lisa, there's so many different topics we could delve into. Where can we learn more?
I could go on all day. Anybody that wants to follow up on anything, absolutely can contact me. And I'm happy to help with numbers. I'm happy to help you maneuver our system to get copies of reports. And I do a 2-day child death class, and I always invite anyone in the local areas to come. So I'm not sure where I am lately, but the fatality teams usually know when I'm in their area. I also run my class. This is a Justice Academy. So professionals are, non-law enforcement professionals are also open to coming to those classes as well. It's a 2-day extravaganza of child death. So yeah, but please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any other follow-up questions or want any data or anything like that. We have a very, very comprehensive set of data. So like I said, we review all of our cases. So it's a mammoth amount of information on our end, but we're happy to share it. Thanks, Scott, for posting it up. Yep, there's my email, my phone number. So please let me know if I can help anybody. And if something comes up in your ERs or in your health practices that you have a question about, call your regional autopsy facility, talk to those pathologists. You can call Mecklenburg, you can call me here, or call Baptist if the cases happen to go up there. You guys are quite welcome. Thank you for having me. Email contact is on the last slide, and I think Scott's gonna share that information as well. Perfect, thank you. Did everybody see that slide okay? Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is very informative. And as you can tell with all the questions and the interaction, so we greatly appreciate your time. If there's any additional questions, feel free to reach out directly to Lisa through the email listed on the screen or in the chat box, or you can reach out to me and I will forward the information.
Perfect, great, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks, bye-bye.